Here it is, I'm ready to go with my dough. It's been in the refrigerator and I've got a cup of brown sugar. To that cup of brown sugar, I'm going to add my 4 teaspoons of cinnamon. 4 teaspoons, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1 tablespoon and a teaspoon. And I'm just going to mix the cinnamon into the brown sugar. The reason I'm using the whisk is not just because I want to whisk it up really well, but because brown sugar, once it's packed, it tends to be thick and clumpy. And I want to make sure I disperse this the whole way out. And this is a great way for doing that. Apparently somebody's coming. That's why the dog is barking. Or whatever is happening. Alright, so it looks fairly good. I got a couple little clumps in there, but that's not too bad. So I'm going to switch. I left my butter out overnight because I wanted it to be softened. And it is softened. So I'm ready to go with that. You can now go ahead and use your whisk if you want to. You can use a pastry blender. You can use 2 knives. Whatever you want to use to mix this up. I'm going to try first with my plastic spatula and see how it works with this before I cut anything else in. We just want to mash this up into here. The recipe will tell you to go ahead and use the softened butter first and put it on your dough. I just happen to like to do this part a little bit better. So since I like this one better, this is the way that I'm going to do this. Now I'm going to start working with the dough. This is enough for 24 rolls. If you don't want 24 rolls, obviously you're not going to use as much. You're going to cut your ingredients in half. You may choose to use the exact same amount of your inside because you might like that. I'm going to take this, just going to use a knife, and I'm going to cut it in half. I'm going to put one back into the bowl. 1/2 of this back into the bowl. I don't want to take too much of my gluten strands. I'm going to put that down here. This is it's still a little bit sticky. I don't want it to stay too much onto my mat. So I'm just going to add a little bit of flour that way. And I'm going to try to get this all the way out to the end. It's funny, when I cook, always in front of me where I stand here, you'll always find flour on the floor. I have to clean that up every time after I'm done. Using your hands, because it's a really soft dough, using your hands you can start pulling everything out. And I should add that my dough is not cold. I got it out and it was a few minutes warm before we started. So you can use a large rolling pin. I happen to have this small one. I have a large one, but I like this small one. I also wanted to leave this out. I sprayed my pan to get it ready. If you don't have a rolling pin, take this and put some aluminum foil around it, and that's what you can use to roll out. I'm just going to roll it out, and because it has the gluten strands in it, I'm going to roll it and it's going to come back. And I'm going to roll it and it's going to come back. And if you are really struggling with it and you feel like you cannot keep it out into the shape that you need it, walk away, go get a drink of water, look out the window, see why your dog is barking. Maybe your cat is meowing. Take a few minutes, let the dough rest. Once it rests, you come back and you can start working with it. Because if you've ever listened to me talk before, you know that the gluten strands, the more you work with them, they pull together. This is the resting period, is when they start to relax out again, and that's what you're going to need to do. So why don't I get everything ready here? Then I'm going to put them into my oven. I have on my oven, I have something called proof, which means it's a proofing. It makes it a little bit warm. If you don't have that, you have several options to do if you want to get them raised in about an hour. One of them is turn your oven light on and get your oven warmed up. Turn your oven on to 180 degrees, and when it hits about 120, turn it off, because you just want it just to be warm in there. If you don't have any of those options, you can put it in your oven, boil some water, put some water in a bowl, put it in the oven, and just close everything up. And once the water has boiled, it's warm, it will warm the oven up, and that will help to proof your dough. You're not like, oh, I don't have everything exactly right. You don't have everything exactly right. If you don't take time and start playing with it, you're never going to get anything either. So we have been hanging out here, and nobody's doing anything much these days. I've been playing with a lot of my sourdough. Here I am, an old person, and I'm learning new tricks. So you can learn new tricks too. This isn't gorgeous, but it's good enough for me at this moment. I want to get started working on it. So I'm going to take half of this, roughly speaking, and I'm going to just spread it out all over. And again, you can do your butter first and then do your brown sugar cinnamon afterwards and sprinkle it. I should have said the reason that I prefer to do it this way is because when I start to roll it, if I don't have it mashed into the butter properly, I guess mashed in isn't a good word. If I don't have it adhering to the butter really well, then my problem is that it starts flopping as I'm turning it, and I don't want that to happen. We're just doing a thin layer. Some people really like the cinnamon mixture in the middle. If so, you double your cinnamon mixture. You do whatever works for you. This is all in your own taste. There are certain things that you can play with, certain things that you can't. The filling is something that you can play with and make changes to it. All right, let me just get this spread out just a little bit more, and then I'm going to show you how to roll it, how to cut it, and then I will use that same bowl to do my icing. The icing is just a powdered sugar icing. Very simple icing. It's powdered sugar. I use a little bit of softened butter, which every time I'm measuring something, if I have a little bit, I push aside the softened butter and put it into the corner of my refrigerator because I know I'll be using it. And that's all I needed was 2 tablespoons for this today. A little bit of vanilla and a little bit of milk. And I'm going to mix it up. If you read other people's recipes, it does not call for butter. I do butter because when I put it on top of my hot cinnamon rolls, I love to have that butter just melt down into it. So it's all about what I personally like, and you do what you personally like. All right, I guess that took me some time, and you're probably thinking, I don't want to take all the time to do that. It's not bad. Oh, Jack. He's probably barking at the neighbors. That's what he usually is doing. So I'm going to start turning it. I have to roll towards me. Some people can roll away. I'm going toward me. If you don't have a mat like this, just do it on the table. If you have parchment paper, you can do it on parchment paper if you want. The reason I like the mat is it sort of gives me an idea about how thick to make this out. And you can see I didn't have a perfect rectangle, so therefore it's not exactly what it needs to be. So I'm going to try to stretch this out a little bit when I get over here. And I'm going to lift this part up and come over and try to seal it down. Again, if I wasn't having the brown sugar already in with the butter, that would be falling out as I was doing that. I'm going to do this to try to make it about even as I go on over here at the end and just tuck it in. So this is about, I don't know, 16 inches maybe. Unfortunately, my inside is a little bit thinner than my outsides are. So I'm just going to play with this a little bit and try to make it more even. And I'm going to go into the middle and I'm going to cut. I want to get about 12 out of here. So, oh my gosh, that's higher math. So now I have 6. So I'm cutting that in half. There we go. And that means I need to get how many out of each of these pieces? Right, 3. I'm sorry, I'm just being an idiot. 1, 2, 3. So that'll be 4, 5, 6 out of this part. You can also use, if you choose to, dental floss. Yep, sounds weird, right? You don't have to saw through quite so much. You take the dental floss, you go down underneath it, you bring it up, you cross it, cuts right through. Doesn't even make that sound, but it does. It's a weird thing that I do. I've got my pan. I just went ahead and sprayed it with a little bit of the butter. And I'm gonna take it and I'm gonna push them down. That's how I like them to look. So now that I have them all in here and just lightly flattened out, I want to cover it because I want to keep the moisture in there. So not everybody buys their stretch wrap in this size, but I do, and I love this because you don't get all caught up in it. Isn't it the worst? Stretch wrap is not my friend. Saran wrap is not my friend. This is my friend. Wheel it over, and I've got it nicely done. This is going to go in for about an hour into the proofing oven. If you don't have an oven to do that, just put it somewhere that you've got some moisture going on. I have been known to, I know this is really weird, on a warm day, take them outside and put them in the grill because it's warm in the grill and they'll proof relatively quickly doing it that way. How do I know when they're done? Because when I touch the dough, and the dough slowly fills back in, that's when they're ready to be baked. So once that is done, I'll put them in the oven, I'll bake them, and then we'll bring them out and we'll meet back together again to bring them out and to put the icing on them. Okay, so my timer is going off for the second time. I started it at 20 minutes and I realized 20 was not enough because they had risen so much. I needed a few more minutes. So I ended up with 24. The recipe does say 20 to 24. You have to check it to see what's going to work for you. Please always remember to pull out the shelf. Don't just reach in and burn your arms. I do wear very long, but that's just the best way to do that, is to pull your shelf out instead of reaching in. Close it up, and here we are ready to go. So these are harder around the outside, so I know that they're finished. You can also see that they're starting to brown on the top. I could leave them in a little bit longer. These, the parts that were in the back, are actually a little bit harder and brown, more brown. So I think they're fine and ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and use this knife that's sitting here, and I want to pull some aside, and that's how I'm going to make that final decision. Are they ready? Do they need to go back in for another minute? This to me, when you're baking, is one of the hardest parts to know. I look on the bottom. See how it's nicely browned on the bottom? We know that they're ready to go because it's browning on there. And I've already gone ahead, 4 cups of powdered sugar. I had a couple tablespoons, 2 of butter. I put in a little bit of vanilla into there, and then the recipe calls for heavy cream. I don't have any heavy cream today, so I just use milk. It doesn't matter. And I just started layering a little bit, mixing it together, adding the butter in, or adding the butter in on the side, and then adding slowly but surely all of the milk in. And we're just going to slather these up because there's nothing better. Now remember those pieces that were originally the end pieces, the ugly pieces that everybody gets sad about. You make sure those get a whole lot of icing, because if you're not going to get so much cinnamon, you better get some icing on there. You can also, if you're real fancy, you can open this up, take this out, put it into a bag, and you can squeeze it all over top of it, but really doesn't matter. All we want to do is have the icing melt all over top of it. And remember, the more butter that you put into it, the more it's just going to melt right in. I wanted to let you know I made a second batch of the sweetbread, and I'm starting to raise over here something else that you can do with that sweetbread. If you did not want to be doing 24 cinnamon rolls, you could use half of it. This happens to be pie filling that I had in there. Flattened it out, put the pie filling in here, did some little cuts, crisscrossed it, and it's raising, and I'm going to throw that in the oven right when we're finished. Thank you so much for coming to learn about cinnamon rolls. I'm telling you, you are not going to find an easier recipe than this one. Please like us, subscribe, ring some bell, and let me know if you've made these things so I know if you've liked them. Thanks. This is Rose McDonough. Have a good afternoon.